Once upon a time, there were two little boys, Samuel and Jacob. And they grew up together. They were very small boys together. They started school together. They studied together through school. They played in various teams and sports together. They were best of friends for their entire lives. And they got married about the same time. They had kids at about the same time. And then one day, Samuel got an employment opportunity in another country. And he took that opportunity and moved away. But before they left, they made a pact that they would try to get together at least once every year. And they continued to do that for some time, until one day Jacob happened to be on a trip, and he was taking him to a country that was not far from where Samuel was at, and he decided that he would make a trip and see Samuel. The problem was that the country that Samuel was in was at war with another country, and travel restrictions were keeping people from entering the country and whatnot. So Jacob decided that he would sneak in the cover of darkness at night and go visit his friend. That was not a good plan, and he was caught. And he was taken before a military tribunal that very night, and he was found guilty of being a spy, and he was sentenced to be hung at dawn the next morning. And as the custom, the king always witnessed these executions. And as they were getting ready to hang Jacob, Jacob asked the king, he pled the king, he threw himself on the mercy of the king, and he said, please give me 1 week to go visit my family, to say goodbye, and to set them up. I am innocent of these charges. Please grant me this. And the king scoffed at him and said, you've been brought to me by the military tribunal as a spy. Why would I think that you would come back? And at that moment he heard a voice, and the voice said, I will stand in his honor. And it was Samuel. And he said, I will go to jail and wait this week, for I know that this is an honorable man, and he will return if he says he will. The king was impressed by this, and he said, okay, if you want to do that, we'll release this guy, and we're going to put you in jail. And if he comes back, he hangs. But if he does not, we hang you. So the week went by, the day came, no Samuel, no Samuel. The sun started to go down, no Samuel. And so finally the king said, we've waited long enough. He's not returning. Prepare the gallows. And as they were getting ready to hang Jacob, all of a sudden from the back came a voice, stop! Do not hurt my friend, for I have returned. Jacob came back to save his friend. The king was so impressed with the bond of this friendship, the strength of the love between these two men, that each would risk his life to save the other. That he pardoned Jacob. And he decreed that he was not a spy, and he let him go. But before he let him go, he said, there is one last thing, one request I have of you. And they turned to him and he said, what is that? And he said, let me be the third member of your friendship. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this a little bit warmer Alaskan day. I've been talking about each week the single digits that are facing us, and wow, we've got double digits today. High double digits. We're in the 20s. So thank you very much for coming out, and welcome. The title of my talk today is Love Within, and we're continuing this series on love. There are two major points. What actions do we take when the world's needs come knocking on our door. And number 2, we belong to each other. So, what actions do we take when the world's needs come knocking on our door? Well, one thing, we can ignore it. We can just ignore it. After all, what can I do? What can one insignificant person like me do to solve world hunger or to create world peace? I'm just one guy up here in Anchorage, Alaska. I can't do much, so I can ignore that. Or we can ignore it by saying, well, I'm too busy to do anything about it. I'm too busy praying, or I'm too busy doing something else. But we have another option, and that we can answer the door. We can listen to that knock. We can truly listen to one another. It's becoming a lost art in our practitioner training. One of the things that we emphasize and we do every week are exercises in learning to listen to one another. I think of, as I drive in, there's sort of a rotating group of homeless people that congregate at the off-ramp where it comes into Diamond, and I go to make a turn. And I know that until we started our homeless kind of an endeavor here, that I'd always look away. I was afraid to make eye contact with them. I didn't want that feeling. So I didn't really listen to them. I didn't acknowledge them. And it wasn't until I actually made some friends within the homeless community that I realized these are people just like you and me. We can listen. Our job is to look beyond our differences and see our oneness. We're not in this alone. It reminds me of the story of the 2 guys in a rowboat. They took this rowboat out into the middle of this huge lake, and they were out there, and one guy took out of his pocket a small drill, and he started drilling a hole in the bottom of the boat. And the other guy said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry." He said, what do you mean? You're going to flood the boat? We're going to drown out here. He says, "Oh, no, don't worry." He said, "I'm only drilling a hole underneath my seat." And sometimes we're like that. We don't realize that our actions really make a difference to a lot of people. Our actions can influence the whole world. Our job is to look beyond our differences and see our oneness. That knock we hear at the door is Spirit, God, the universe, source, whatever name you decide to ascribe to it, asking us to listen. We can be grateful for whoever or whatever comes. It's a guide from beyond. Number 2, we can answer the knock. And we are open to the possibility. A friend of mine, Reverend J. Lang, he was 2 years ahead of me in school, told a story once of a friend of his. Her name was Jane. And she wasn't a woman of great financial means or anything, but she did have a soft spot for homeless people, and she loved to help other people, particularly the homeless. Another one of her hobbies, her passions, was dogs and animals, and she had a beautiful golden retriever named Misty, and she was training Misty to be a guide dog. Misty was a wonderful dog, but she was not well suited to be a guide dog. She was way too friendly, way too sociable. I mean, she loved everybody, and she'd go off task and wag her tail and be this loving dog. After a year of trying to turn Misty into a guide dog, the people that were training the trainers said, "You know, Misty's going to have to wash out of the program. We're sorry. She's just not going to make it as a guide dog." And Jane was given the opportunity of adopting Misty herself or putting her up for adoption. And she couldn't take Misty. She lived in an apartment that didn't allow dogs. It really was not an option for her. So she thought about it, and she thought, I wonder if the shelter, the homeless shelter that she volunteered for, would take Misty. And so she asked, and they said that they would. And so this homeless shelter adopted Misty. Now, this homeless shelter was facing a problem in that they had a suite of services available to the homeless in that area, but they really weren't being used very much. There was a distrust between the shelter and the people that were using it. Now, they may stop in for a meal, they may get a blanket, or they may pick up something, but they really weren't utilizing all of the things that were available, things for health care and dental care and the other things that could help them change. And they just weren't taking advantage of it because there was this fear, this resentment. But now all of a sudden we have Misty. Misty had no judgment. Misty didn't know, and Misty wormed her way right into the hearts of each and every one of those homeless people. Misty was the star. Misty was the one that showed the homeless people that they could trust the shelter. And all of a sudden the activity of the shelter increased. And it was all because Jane answered the knock at the door. Jane answered Spirit's knock and answered that question and allowed Misty to be who she could be. Mother Teresa, I've been quoting her a lot recently, but Mother Teresa said, not all of us can do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love. Answer the knock at the door. My third sub-point here is that the universe answers our knock as well. The great way shower Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, said, ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened for you. For whoever asks receives. He who seeks finds, and him who knocks the door is opened. It makes no difference whether you want to do something for someone, like Jane did with Misty, or if you have a problem or an issue in your life, if you've got something, a challenge within your life, you have on your team an incredible, powerful ally. When you approach the universe, when you approach God with sincerity and intention, it will respond. My second point, we belong to each other. We belong to each other because of our oneness and our spiritual DNA. We are all products of the one. We have all been made by source, energy, spirit, God, whatever term you choose to describe it. We are all products of that infinite intelligence, that divine creative force. And that creative force had to make all that is out of something, and the only thing that it could make it out of was itself. And that includes us. We have all been made out of God's stuff. It had to be. They couldn't come from anywhere else because there was only one creator. And so we have all of that within us. All of that which is God is within each and every one of us. And if we believe that that God, that infinite being, that presence, that power is one of love, then we must be made of love. It cannot be anything other than love because it would be self-destructive. It would be fighting itself continually. There can only be one life, one power, one presence. And that power, that presence, that life is the life of God, and that is the life of each and every one of us. And it is a life of love. is a incredible gentleman by the name of Howard Thurman. He was born in 1899. He's an African-American man who achieved great academic, theologic stature. When he was 13 years old, he had studied as far as he could in the small town in Florida that he was in. And at that time, black people could not study any further than junior high, what we would have called junior high today, grade school. And the nearest place where he could attend a high school was over 100 miles away. And he desperately wanted to go. He applied and he was accepted, but he had to get there. His mother borrowed against an insurance policy that she had and was able to get just the right amount of train fare to get him this 100 miles to go to high school. He had worked up a job. He could stay with his cousin, and he could press clothes at night to earn his keep. And on the day came when he was to leave, he arrived at the train station with an old battered trunk that was held together with a rope. And as he went to check in, the conductor told him that he could not take that old battered trunk with no handles, that if it didn't have a handle, it had to go as freight. And there would be an additional charge to ship his trunk as freight instead of as baggage. And he, of course, didn't have that money, and he sat down on the dock in front of the train and began to cry. And he looked down, and there were two large feet in front of him, and he looked up, and there was a man, and he looked down at him, and he said, "Why are you crying, son?" And Howard Thurman told him of his dilemma. And the man said, "If you have the courage to leave this town, to go get an education and better yourself, the least I can do is help you." And he said, "Stand up, son, come with me." And they went over to the window, and this man bought the ticket that it would take to ship his trunk as freight. And he handed Thurman the receipt and disappeared into the crowd. Howard Thurman never forgot that. But it was in that moment, and this is a quote, that he began to think of everyone as being connected, as in some unseen fashion, like atoms bouncing off of each other, setting off a series of chain reactions, not at all randomly, but part of a plan, a master blueprint. And that frames Howard Thurman's thinking. 20 years later, Howard was part of a YMCA peacekeeping expedition that had sent African Americans from the United States to other parts of the world and friendship building. And he was standing in Khyber Pass looking into Afghanistan, and he thought of the traders that had covered this route thousands of miles, and he looked and he was just touched in this. And as he sat there, his mind suddenly became transfixed, shutting out everything around him until there was an absolute stillness. Thoughts invaded his consciousness, thoughts that he knew were not his. He saw in this illuminated state a world not divided by nations' borders, by money or power, by race or religion, but a world as one. All were God's children. Standing at the Khyber Pass, Thurman felt a deep call to action. The highlight of this trip that he was on was that he would get to meet Gandhi. And he did. He went on into India and he was able to meet Gandhi. But what he took away wasn't the great meeting with Gandhi. It was that experience he had standing at Khyber Pass. And so when he returned to San Francisco, he opened his own church and he began to preach. And he began to preach of this oneness, of our unity, our oneness with one another. but he never drew many people. Back in the days when he was at college, when he taught, he would routinely draw hundreds to his sermons. And back in San Francisco, he was lucky to pull 50. And he wondered if he had not heard God's message right, if he was really following, if he was supposed to do. And he struggled with that for some time, but he kept on, and kind of the lack of enthusiasm following on that gave him some time, and he wrote a book. In 1949, Thurman wrote Jesus and the Disheartened, which called for people to see beyond race. Well, the book didn't sell very well either.
Son of a gun.
But one copy of this book found its way into the hands of a divinity student from Georgia. And a few years later, this divinity student from Georgia was tasked with speaking to a very large group in front of a church in Alabama. And this divinity student didn't have time to write a speech. He didn't have time to prepare. All he could do was stand up and speak from his heart, and what came from his heart were words that could have been uttered by Thurman. He got up and he said, "We, the disinherited of this land, we who have been oppressed so long, are tired of going through the long night of captivity. And now we are reaching out for the daybreak of freedom and justice and equality." Those are words that could have been uttered by Thurman himself. But those were the words of his mentee that he came to follow. Those were the words of Martin Luther King Jr. Thurman became an advisor to King, and he was able to help him. But we can do exactly that. Sometimes what we do may appear to be small, but we don't know who we may be touching. We don't know how far the ripples can go out. But sometimes we avoid this oneness. Sometimes we avoid intimacy with another. And that's such a shame. But we do it all the time. Another one of my colleagues, Reverend Catherine Benson, she's from Cape Coral, Florida. And she told a story once about her grandma. Her grandma loved cats, but Grandpa didn't. And so they never had cats. And Grandpa passed away. And so Catherine and her sister decided this would be a great time to finally get Grandma a cat. And so they scheduled a meeting. They were going to get together and they're going to take Grandma to the shelter and rescue a cat. But Grandma wouldn't go. Grandma never went. Grandma died 5 years later. Doctors had no reason. She was in health. She just gave up on living. And Catherine always thought that if only she would have allowed that intimacy, if she would have allowed a cat into her life, she might have lived a lot longer. And we're all like that. I still don't have a dog after Jake and Allie. I'm just not ready. And I don't want to go back to that place. But after I read that, maybe it's time.
Yeah.
How much am I hurting myself? Well, this isn't part of the talk. We're grand sitters, whatever, to my son's yellow Labrador. Alieska was a yellow lab. And her name is Grace. Gracie. So I thought, why not? We could get a lab and we could name her Joy. And then we could do everything with Grace and Joy. Fear of loss and pain make us forgo the pleasures of our oneness. But the most important intimacy that we can ever have is our intimacy with Spirit, our intimacy with Source, the universe, God, whatever name you assign to it. That is the most important intimacy we can ever have. And when we can accept, deep within us, we can accept that we can never be separate from God. That God is always in us. God is always a part of us. We can never be separate from God. And when we can accept that, we can open the door to the possibility to love, bringing peace to the world. What I want everyone to take away today, your takeaway. When life knocks at the door of your guest house, meet it at the door laughing and let it in. Let your love touch the world. And just maybe you will be like Samuel and Jacob, and the world will want to be part of your friendship. And so it is with that awareness of our oneness, that awareness of our connection with one another, that I invite my colleagues, the practitioners, to join me in surrounding and holding our congregation in love and light. And we just simply recognize that there is indeed a power in the universe, one power, one presence, one life. That life is the life of God. That life is the life of each and every one of us at this and in every moment. And that life is your life, and that life is my life, and that life is love. That life is prosperity. That life is abundance. That life is perfect health. And so I speak my word for anyone who is suffering from the appearance of dis-ease. We know that behind this appearance there is that blueprint, there is that pattern which is perfect. The pattern from which we were made. And that pattern is perfect. And it is that which we call forth. We speak my word for those who are experiencing the appearance of lack and limitation. We just simply know that we live in an abundant universe. There are more grains of sand on the beach than we can possibly count. There are more stars in the heavens than we can ever count. And all of that is open to us as we open up and accept it. And lastly, I speak my word for those who are feeling separation. Separation from their divine source, separation from one another. So every relationship I know is a relationship that is founded and grounded in love, God's love. Whether it be a work relationship, it's going to resolve itself one way or the other. Family relationship, it's going to resolve itself in love. Romantic relationship, it's going to resolve itself because we are all beings of love, because we are all children of the Most High. And so I just simply give thanks. I give thanks for my awareness of the power and the presence of God in each and every person. Everyone. Everyone. I give thanks for that awareness. Now I release these words, the working of a law that always says yes. So we just give thanks, we let it go, we let it be. And so it is.
So it is.